Welcome to the International Teacher Podcast with your host, Matt the Family Guy, Kent the Cat Guy, and me, Greg the Single Guy. We are recording episodes from around the globe to tell you about the best kept secret in education. That's right, it's teaching overseas. We're glad to have you join us.
Welcome to the International Teacher Podcast. I'm Kent the Cat Guy, and with me today is...
I'm Greg the Single Guy, and Matt is not with us again, Kent, but we're going to trudge on through, and hopefully he'll be back soon. But we have a great guest today, Kent.
Who's our great guest today, Greg?
You don't know who it is? Okay, his name is Chris Colma, and Chris Colma is coming to us from the view of a music teacher in international schools. And we've never had a music teacher on before, and this is sort of fun because we have had a couple requests, and I want to introduce him because he's got a lot to share with us, and we'll meet it here. So welcome to the show, Chris.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, guys. It's really nice to be here on the show with you.
And Kent, he has a podcast. I'm sorry, I'll talk to the audience. Chris has his own podcast, and I'll let him introduce that and everything. But one of my favorite questions, Chris, and this has to do with our show too, is you have an introductory question where you ask somebody and you say, listen, most of your guests, you say, share a little bit about how you got into international teaching. And you don't always ask it that way, but that's my way of saying, tell us your story a little bit.
Yeah, it's a great question. I love that question because everyone that I've come across that works in an international school has some kind of story. They have some kind of journey that they've been on. So my journey, it's a good one in that I have a bit of an international kind of background in my family, in a sense that my parents are Dutch. My wife, she's got Lebanese background, English background. And so we always had this real interest in travel. And when I became a music teacher, I trained and did my teaching and education degree in Australia. But very quickly, if not even before I finished my degree, I was already thinking about teaching overseas. And I'd heard about it. In fact, I heard about it in a lecture at university. We had a guy come to talk to us about teaching in England. And it was about doing cover teaching in England. And at the end of that conversation, he just kind of threw in there, oh, yeah, and there's these international schools, too, that you might want to look into. And I remember my wife and I just looked at each other and were like, international schools? That sounds like what we've been thinking about. So that was
What's that?
Yeah, right? And that was the beginning. And then it was just kind of this constant thing in the back of the mind. I played professionally as a musician for quite a while. I had my own music school teaching the bass guitar. I was doing all sorts of things in music education, and then I taught in Australia for 2 years in the state system. Got some experience teaching there in a high school, and it just got to a point where a couple of things changed in our lives, and we started really seriously looking at international school teaching. And my wife found a position in Buenos Aires in Argentina, and we'd both already thought about how cool it would be to live and work in South America for a whole bunch of reasons, but one of them being the language. You know, we thought it'd be great to go somewhere where we can be immersed and learn Spanish. And as an Australian, you know, Australia is one of those countries where you really don't learn a second language at school, and we're just so disconnected from any other country with any other language that, you know, you do a little bit of language in school, but it never really goes far unless you're fully immersed. So my wife went for the job, got a job at a school in Argentina. We packed up everything in a very short amount of time, and we were there. And we just kind of landed in Argentina, never been to South America, didn't know much about it, and just got stuck in, really. So
you went as the trailing spouse, right?
Kind of went as the trailing spouse.
Or did you have a job also?
So I went over with sort of inklings of a job. I definitely didn't have a full-time contract. So my wife's also a music teacher, and so she got a head of secondary music role. And I went over and I was kind of looking to do some other stuff anyway. So I did my master's. When I arrived, I started doing my master's and did a bit of teaching, but soon after, the head of primary music position came up, and I took that and just kind of jumped in. And so that was really interesting. And I started teaching there, learning more about teaching elementary, primary school music. And so essentially my wife and I were kind of running the music department together for a few years, and it was amazing. Like, it was kind of everything we dreamed about in terms of being in another cultural context, learning the language. You really couldn't get by speaking English in Argentina. You had to, you walk out your front door and you had to speak Spanish. Otherwise nothing would happen. Like, you couldn't get groceries. You couldn't get in a taxi. You couldn't do anything. So it was a true immersion.
But you were already interested in teaching music to some age of children.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. That was definitely my trajectory. It's just that I didn't have the job. So it was just a different way of getting there, I guess. Yeah. So we did 3 years in Argentina and had a blast, traveled a lot, traveled a lot of South America, up into North America as well. Things just kind of progressed and sort of, really kind of enjoyed the whole experience. But then the economy kind of collapsed in Argentina. Things got really difficult financially. This was 2011, 2012. And we needed to look for something else. And so I then found a job in Malaysia. I was like, oh, that job looks great. And I'd had the elementary music teaching experience. And I already had taught secondary music. And so I had sort of both. And this position came up in Malaysia for a primary music teacher, and went for it and got the job. And it sort of the reverse happened. So I went over with a contract. My wife didn't have a contract, and she fell into a position which ended up being art. So she was also trained in visual arts. That was just really interesting because we didn't really have, like we did with Argentina, we didn't have a specific country in mind. We just were like, okay, Asia's a good region and it's a bit closer to Australia. And we traveled through Asia before, but never been to Malaysia. And just absolutely fell in love with it.
Can I ask you which school it was at Montkiara? And you don't have to say it on the air if you don't want to, but I was wondering, I know about Montkiara is one that I know of in Malaysia, in KL.
Yep.
And I know of one other, the international school. If you and your wife had stayed into international schools, keep looking around and trying to get jobs at the same time at the same school, it would have been difficult because you both teach the same specialty.
I guess a couple of things. Firstly, the schools, I'm more than happy to mention them. So in Argentina, it was St. George's College, Quilmes. There's 2 St. George's colleges, and I didn't mention the name. So Quilmes, this is a traditional British international school that has deep roots in colonial times in Argentina. And the school in Malaysia was the Garden International School, another British education model, but quite a internationalized British model. And it was actually just around the corner from MKIS, Montkiara International School. So really close by. And then ISKL that you mentioned. So those two are both the American international schools in Malaysia. And as you said, big schools. So I was at Garden International School, and you're right. Like, one of the other things that we came up against and heard more and more is that some schools didn't want to have a couple in the same music department. So it actually worked really well for us that my wife ended up, because she loved teaching art as well and really found a home teaching art anyway. So it worked out really well for us, because I think from what I've heard, it's quite difficult to try and find 2 jobs in the same department for a whole bunch of reasons.
It is, and that's why I'm so amazed. And it is neat and unique to see that both of you are teaching the same specialty, and seeing somebody that teaches in a homeroom or in a secondary classroom, and then their husband or their spouse, their other half, teaches music is very common. But to have that, and wow, I tell you, and the music community internationally is so small, and you're making it even smaller. I know that by reaching out and interviewing on your podcast. You've definitely got some great podcast interviews with people that are reaching out and touching all over the world with the music programs. You mentioned the British program at both your the schools that you worked at were both British curriculum. Did they also do IB stuff?
Some do a mix.
The International Baccalaureate?
Yeah, so the school in Argentina did IB at their final years. The school in Malaysia did the CIE, the Cambridge International Certificate, at the final years. So that didn't do IB.
We don't get a music teacher on here very often. This is you are our first pure music teacher that we've had on our podcast. We're trying to reach all over the world with different kinds of aspects, all different points of view.
Chris, how did you get started in music?
Good question. Music learning it really can start really sort of at an early age. For me, my grandfather was a organist, classical pianist, choir conductor, very musical. My dad is a musician, pianist, and bass player. So very musical family, and I'm one of four, so I have three brothers. But we all grew up, very surrounded by music, but not really interested in music. We all we wanted to do was play football, play soccer. So we just spent all our days running around a field. And yes, music was going on in the background. Like I did piano lessons, but I hated it. All I wanted to do was play soccer. So at about 14, I mean, I had music in my life in ways, but it was really not there. But at about 14, I think my mum said to me, "Hey, Chris, you should look at doing something else, because if all you do is play soccer, like, sure, you might be good at it and there might be some future in there or whatever. But if you get injured, then what are you going to do?" And she was like, "Why don't you just do some music? Like, your dad plays music, you like it, go for it." So I picked up the bass guitar and got it. I didn't even know what a bass guitar was. I thought it was a guitar, but it's a bass guitar. And so I had to learn that lesson first. And started, I think it was about 13 years old, I started just playing along with my dad. So he'd play on the piano and just call out the notes over his shoulder. And I just learned, because bass guitar is quite easy to get started on, right? It can be quite tricky to master, but to get playing, you sort of just need to know a few basics. So I started playing along with him. And then actually it was quite special, because then I played with my grandfather and my dad at a gig really quickly. Like in about a month, we played a trio together. So 3 generations. That was pretty cool. And just kind of kept playing the bass, but just, it was there. It was just a new interest. And then at about 15, I had an injury and I had a full knee reconstruction. So I had an ACL tear. My anterior cruciate ligament, whole knee kind of exploded.
Ouch.
And that was
Ouch is right.
That was the end of soccer. And so the diagnosis was obviously operation, knee reconstruction, and then sit on the couch for 9 months and don't do any sport. So that was difficult, of course, but I was like, well, I've got the bass. Like, I just need to sit to practice that. So that works well. And I just played and played and played, hours and hours a day. And within a space of a year, after I sort of recovered from the reconstruction, I'd kind of changed. Like I really got into music. It's all I wanted to do. I went back and played soccer, but I sort of lost some of the kind of passion for it. And that was the beginning. And then I just kind of, the trajectory went from there. I did it for, my exams at school. And I just really kind of quickly got into it, and then ended up doing it at university, like doing a degree in music. And that's what I studied. I learned the bass at university level and played in orchestras and played in bands and ended up becoming a studio musician. And yeah, it sort of just escalated.
Does that mean that your preferred instrument and the one you studied was bass?
Yes.
And like in the orchestra, it was the stand-up bass, like the I don't know what the contrabass.
Yeah.
You call it the contrabass? What do you call it? With the stand-up one,
double bass
in the back, the boom, boom, boom. I love that.
Upright
Yes.
Double bass.
So my
love that.
main instrument was the electric bass. So normal 4-string electric bass. That's what I started on, and that would be probably my specialty. But then in the degree, I had to do all of it. So went on to the double bass.
Well, I just had to ask that because I know music teachers, you play everything. I'm in a jazz band, or I have been in a jazz band recently, where there's at least 5 music teachers. A shout out to Brian White. Have you ever met Brian? Do you know Brian White by name by any chance? Or
is he? This could be bizarre, but is he in Europe teaching?
Right now he is.
I actually just
Milan.
This is bizarre because my really good friend is a Spanish teacher at the International School Milan, and she was just talking about him 3 days ago when I was hanging out with him in Milan. So I do know Brian White. There you go. I know of him by name.
Well, there you go. I'll send you some music.
He worked with us for he worked with us for about 5 years.
Great.
Shout out to Brian White.
I'm looking forward to meeting him.
Had to ask because it is so small, this world, right? Wait till you hear him play trumpet. That's his. I don't know what you guys call it when you have one special instrument that you carry through. You and your wife are both music teachers, or were, practicing music teachers, and now you're still in the music field, helping out other teachers in international schools. If I walked into your home right now, which is Australia, right? Mm-hmm. If I walked into your home right now and you and your wife are sitting there, how many instruments are in your home?
Good one. We pared it back a bit. We used to have a lot more, and we moved them on, mainly just for mobility, getting around different countries and things. But I've got two basses. We've got about 3 or 4 guitars. We've got a whole bunch of drums. My wife's a singer, so she carries her instrument everywhere, and it's very easy. But I also have a studio, so I have a full production studio at home. So I've got all the tech and all sorts of gadgets in the studio. So it's quite a minimal studio because I do a lot of music production in the computer. So I don't actually have that many instruments because I mainly sample instruments these days. But yeah, there's a few, definitely a few.
Well, I would love a virtual tour of that studio sometime. A question for you.
Don't let him in your home. Don't let him in.
Music teachers must hold a special place in your heart. And what is special for you about music teachers that you've dedicated a good chunk of your time to supporting, helping, and bringing together music teachers, particularly ones working all over the world?
I think being a music educator is a really interesting profession. It's kind of a privilege. We talked briefly before about how all of us have these journeys to musicianship in some way, and they become really special parts of who we are. So we all carry these musical stories of how we've created this passion. It's like this heart thing, as airy-fairy as that might sound. Like there's this deep engagement with the concept of being a musician or engaging with music. And so as a teacher, we carry that into our classroom. And regardless of what we're teaching, like what style of music or what instrument, that passion is always there. There's this underlying deep kind of identity there, this musical identity. And there's actually some really great research on that concept of musical identities in people. And so when as a music educator, and especially in the international school context, where often you're working in a private education context, so you've got all of the influences of privatized education, which means, we're basically all competing for students and making sure our students are doing the things they want to do and have opportunities to choose their subjects and go on trips and do all the things that a private education can offer. As a music educator, you're in that as well. You're trying to share your passion, but you're also trying to present a subject that's academically rigorous, or that's, it's a cultural bearer of the school. Like, think about how amazing music is for school culture building, the way it draws the community together, and it, those concerts where you get all the teachers together and you get all the students together, and there's this moment where everyone forgets about everything and they're just engaged in a musical experience. And I think for a music educator, this happens in other subjects too, but there's this really special extra layer that kind of comes in that's not necessarily found in all subjects. There's this really sort of connective experience between the teacher, between the student, and between an identity shaping experience. It's quite complex, I find. And I think it all comes back to these stories that we carry as musicians.
Well, it's difficult to explain it because, like you say, there's the teaching end of it where we love teachers. We're like, we love kids, we love teaching, sharing our knowledge. But as a music teacher, and I can only say this from a music lover, a music participant, and being a musician myself, I think being a musician, you live through that almost every moment of your life. You live music. Other people listen to music. You create music, you live through your music. That's your passion outside of teaching. So you put those two things together, and it's just like, it's a wonderful, that's why it's so hard to explain. I can't explain it any better. I'm trying to get to it, but I don't know, short of a philosophy course on music, love, and education, I don't know. It's a tough way to say it, right?
Yeah, it's a really complex idea. I think one of the things and one of the reasons why I'm doing what I'm doing now in supporting music educators in international schools is that often music education, it becomes a little bit of an island in itself, because you have the curriculum, but you have all the extracurricular stuff. And you often exist in like a world, like you said, you exist in your own world of musical passion, but your students and your program kind of does too. And by working together across countries and across contexts with the Music Teachers in International Schools group, we're really finding like a sense of solidarity, that there's a place where we can have these bizarre discussions, trying to understand what music education means. And that's all starting to happen. I think I'm really just passionate about exploring it and trying to explain it, trying to understand it, because it's a really fascinating topic.
Building on what you just mentioned, can we have you explain a little bit about your website and your interest now? How are you supporting teachers now? Can you give us the lowdown on what you're doing now?
Yeah, so there's kind of two angles to this. So one of them is in my previous role at Garden in Malaysia, I was the head of music, and I, had a great time teaching there, and it was everything I'd kind of wanted it to be as a head of music. I had a great team and we had great students and a great program. It was fantastic. But there was just this real lack of kind of connection between other international schools, like what international schools are doing. And from my background in Australia, you have a state system, you have, regional groups always meeting together. And we had that in Asia. There's the FBISIA, the Federation of British International Schools in Asia. Would that come together, and we had a music conference, and that was fantastic, and it still is amazing. But there's so many music teachers working in international schools that just don't have any connection to support mechanisms to connect with other music teachers. Often they're a one teacher department, they're in the middle of nowhere, and they've just got no one to bounce ideas off. And I had a bit of this in Malaysia, but it was more that I kept hearing this from so many people. And I had it more in Argentina. We were quite isolated, not much else going on. I had to travel like an hour to the nearest international school. So I wanted to create a community that was truly global, that just connected people on pedagogy, on ideas, on like music education providers, people that provide services or products, because we'd often go to these conferences and hear about it, but then you forget about it, and then there was this great thing I heard from this guy, but I've forgotten about it. So it's kind of drawing everyone into one space. So it's really serving a need that I felt I needed as a head of music when I was a teacher. And because I'm not overwhelmed by all the concerts that I had to run and all the exam students and running a whole music department, I can be a little bit on the outside, but because I'm so connected with the community still, I can help to foster that because I've got a bit more time to do it. And the other part that feeds into it is that I'm doing a PhD that's looking at all of this. So I'm really still connected to what it means to be a music educator in international schools. And that's what my PhD is doing. So it's interacting with teachers and learning from them and creating an understanding of this field. So that keeps me connected.
What department are you doing your PhD through?
I'm with the University of Newcastle in Australia, and it's through the education and comparative and international education departments.
We'll take a moment's break now to remind you how to reach out to us. Of course, you can address any negative comments to Kent, the cat guy. We do love to hear from you. If you're out on Facebook, we don't do that, but our handle on both Instagram and Twitter are at ITPExpats with an S, ITPEXPATS. As a handle, if you want to, you can send us an old email at internationalteacherpodcast@gmail.com, or you can visit us at our new website at www.itpexpat.com. www.itpexpat.com. Well, back to the show. All right, Chris, I have a good question for you related to what you just mentioned. And here's a scenario. I'm a new teacher for international, but I'm a music teacher, and I'm coming maybe from the States or UK or Australia, where they have strong connections with district, and they might have a lot of resources. They might even have instruments. And I land in this little school in XYZ country, and there's very little there. In fact, the teacher before me scooted off with all their materials. So I'm sitting here, and I'm a brilliant teacher. I mean, I've taught for years, but I just don't have anything to work with. It's like I have to redo the whole and everyone's expecting the concert coming up is maybe at December, or maybe there's an end of year concert. Does that fit into the scenario of someone that would want to start reaching out to you?
Yes.
Or am I off base?
No, I think you're really really onto something there. That is really what we're looking to do. Find a place for people to connect, to collaborate, and to find solidarity when they find themselves in that context where they're just like, what do I do? Like, I don't even know where to start here. Like, I'm really happy that I'm in XYZ country, but I don't know what to do. I don't know where to start.
Right. I mean, like some countries you land in there and it's just a choir. It's just singing. And Honduras for me was like that. But they had a wonderful teacher that came in my second year there. And Mike was just like, man, those kids just loved him. He was a little bit younger. He had fresh ideas, but he had connections. I know he had some kind of a personal network, but the guy before him was just like, okay, we're going to sing the same songs that I have out of my little mimeograph, out of my whatever, his collection. And he takes it all with him. So I think it's just wonderful resource that we haven't had in the past. And the internet is so big. I mean, we're not going to go to Teachers Pay Teachers and find some great music stuff and pay for something every time we want it. We need, as a music teacher, you're going to need support for either music notation or support with instruments. You maybe land in a school and there's instruments, but they haven't been looked at in 15 years, right? Or maybe you have like 35 clarinets and you have one guitar and a bassoon and a trombone. It just seems like you're providing something, you're starting something and you're like getting something started that teachers are going to be able to reach out to and get some answers and get some ideas from you as well as connections.
Absolutely. And that was a really well painted scenario, because that is often what we hear happens. Either someone arrives in a school and there's nothing because it's a brand new school, because there's hundreds of international schools popping up all over the world every year. So they have to build it from scratch. And all they've got is their experience from the UK or the US or wherever they've come from, or from the host country if they're from the home country. So they just have to, magic something. So where do they go? So that's what we're trying to do, provide some connection, a starting point to at least ask that question. And then the other one is, you might rock up at a country, like you said, the previous music teacher has either run the program into the ground. So there's like half things. There's maybe some leftover scrumpled up papers in the corner with some kind of curriculum plan, or there's not.
Seen it, yeah.
Or the opposite. They come into a school with the 30 clarinets because the previous teacher just loves woodwind instruments and they had this amazing program. But you come in, maybe like me as a strings player, and I'm like, oh, so I've got to do 30 clarinets now. So, okay, how do I do that? Because a lot of these international schools, they don't have the system, they don't have the history, they don't have the structure or background of lots of music teachers that have been there forever, or they don't have the cultural kind of context of music where our school does music in this way. It's often the principal just goes, do something, make music, do the concert in December, and you just have to magic it. You just have to do something. So we're really trying to create an environment where people can comfortably come and ask those questions, and all of the experts that have been in the international school field, because a lot of music teachers stay a long time as well. Once you get in a great school and you build your program, you kind of often need to stay a while.
You build the program.
You want to build it. Like if you stay for a couple of years, you're not going to see much happen. But, I stayed 8 years in Garden in Malaysia, and it gave me time to actually see a thing build. And we find that in our
legacy. Yeah.
Yeah. And in the community, we've got tons of people that have been 8, 10, 15, 20 years in schools that have so much knowledge. And when it's amazing to see in our Facebook group, when someone just drops a question, it's just boom, 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 boom. So many great answers and ideas. And that's really what I've been hoping to create.
So, to plug that just a little bit more, your project, I believe, is called Music Teachers in International Schools. What are the different moving parts to that project?
Yeah, so we have the Facebook group, and that's kind of where it started. And that's 900 plus members, and it's very active, I guess. So that was kind of the beginning. And then for me, with my sort of interest, as I mentioned before, in international school music education, the next step for me was like, how can I serve this community in a way that's authentic? I'm also learning, but also just adds value. So that's why I went down the podcast route, because I have connections. I've built up connections over the years in a whole bunch of ways. And so I thought, well, it's going to be nice for me just to knock on some doors, tap on some shoulders and say, hey, do you want to just jump on for a call? Let's have a chat about your experience as a music teacher in an international school, and just put that out there so that that person that's rocked up in XYZ country with nothing can just go and watch a podcast or listen to a podcast, and there's a nice starting point. And I love this stuff. Like, I really like video editing. I love sound engineering and audio editing. So for me, it was a very natural step, and it's been fantastic to do. I've really enjoyed it. I've had some great response, and I basically just get people asking me to be on the podcast. I don't think I've reached out to anyone in a long time. So I've got a list of people that I'm interviewing now. Like, I've got an interview tomorrow. I've got more next week. And so that's been a really nice element that I think has added something to the community. So that's probably the second thing. And then the things that we're working on, which I'm quite excited about, is creating some free resources with some of our experts, where I'm going to maybe interview them, but we might even do it live and invite people to come on, kind of like a webinar where they can just jump in, and I might interview that person live with music teachers in international schools community, and they can do a bit of Q&A live, and we can create some little resources around some topics to kind of add a supplement to the podcast. Or maybe it's going to even be better than the podcast. I don't know, but that's the next project. And then we have a space on LinkedIn that's growing, and a few other things in the pipeline. So, but still working on those.
And I think that, do you write some articles occasionally? Do you have a regular installment that you do, or do you just add things as they come up?
Yeah, I mean, I've been writing articles for a couple of different projects. So I work as a consultant as well. So that's, I guess I kind of have an arm of what I do with music teachers that is a paid consultancy offer, where I work with individuals. And I'm currently working with a few people, especially in developing musical theatre programs, which is something that I've really learnt through international schools. I never had a massive background in musical theatre, but I've always produced concerts and events. And so that's something that I really got into in Malaysia. We had an incredible musical theatre team, and we did some great stuff. So I'm bringing that in now as a consultant and working with some teachers who are just starting their musical theatre programs. So I write articles kind of around what I do as a consultant. Some of those are applicable to the group, so I sometimes share those. Others are with another project that I have, which is the Beginner Orchestra project, and that's specifically serving teachers that are working with early stage musicians and working with early stage orchestras. And I have a team with that, so I don't write all those articles. We sort of all collaborate and do those together.
That you guys actually have compositions for beginning orchestras with limited different kinds of limits of instruments and stuff. Are you guys like not composing? Are you transposing for these, like for earlier year musicians, instead of going off to a big publisher? Because I know musicians do a lot of transposing, a lot of your own writing of music. Is that how you guys are doing it?
Yeah, it's all original compositions actually, and how this started.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, how this started was that
Wow.
In the British international school world, it's quite common to have an international school with all these different musicians, and you throw them all in a room and you just see what happens. We don't have the tradition that you might have in the US schools, where you have band program and string program. It's more of a general music program with an extracurricular orchestra program, which generally works well if you just throw everyone in a room. But it's quite hard to find arrangements and compositions for all of the instruments, because some of the key and the limitations of keys, without going into too much detail, between woodwind, brass, and strings for beginners can be tricky. So what we started doing at Garden, I had an orchestra of 50 or 60 kids of, all the instruments, and we would start arranging a lot of pieces for ourselves because we couldn't find them through the major publishers, a lot of which are through the US. So we'd arrange pop songs, and we'd arrange all sorts of stuff to suit our orchestra, and then we started composing a few pieces because we like composing. And so I've just taken that concept and amplified it. And because of copyright law and things, obviously we can't take arrangements and sell them. So we use it as a creative outlet. We compose pieces with some parameters in mind for the beginners. and we sell them. And it's actually doing really amazingly well. I'm quite excited about it. Since August, now that schools are back in the Northern Hemisphere without COVID, people actually have an orchestra now. We spent basically all the COVID period testing the pieces and testing the concept. And we've got some really nice response from a ton of schools in the UK and international schools.
The fact that it's original compositions through that, and we'll put that website, we're going to put all of your information on our notes, of course, like we always say on podcasts, and we should do better like you do on your podcast. But we will put those links on there because I think as a music teacher, you're looking for music, right? You're looking for original composition for an early orchestra to get started. And if that's and you have a team and it's a consortium, it sounds like a lot of teachers together working on this, right?
Yeah, we have five teachers currently working on that. And we've done one series. So we've got 15 pieces at the moment. And we're just about to start.
That's a consortium for sure.
Yeah, and we're just about to start working on the second series. So that's kind of exciting. And just to be clear for anyone who's listening that's a music teacher, it is a full orchestra, so full symphonic orchestra, strings, brass, woodwinds, percussion, and we do ukulele, guitar, bass, and drum kit in there as well with a piano part. It's kind of just like modeled so that you can get as many people as you want playing at the same time.
You're working on a PhD. Where do you see yourself continuing this work, continuing to expand your project? Would you like to be a teacher at a university, talking to new music teachers, bringing new teachers into the business? Where would you like to be as you move forward?
This year, so the last year, so since leaving Malaysia, it's been a bit of an experiment to work that out, to be honest. Where am I going to go next? I would be lying if I didn't say that I've been on recruitment websites looking at all the jobs that are available, thinking, I just should go and teach in an international school. So that was on the cards. But more and more, my trajectory seems to be heading towards what I'm doing in these other kind of entrepreneurial, I guess, activities around beginner orchestra, around the music teachers in international schools thing, around what the PhD might bring. So, for example, right now I'm overseas for a month. I'm speaking at a conference here in Holland, and then I go to India, and I'm doing 2 days of workshops in Delhi, 1 day with teachers, 1 day with students, and then I'm going to Bangkok, working with FEBISIA, this organization I mentioned before, the Federation of British International Schools in Asia, and I'm presenting 4 workshops at their conference. And then I go to KL and I'm doing a musical theatre workshop in KL. So I would really like to continue doing that if people are interested in having me do it. So I'll see where that goes. That's where I'm sort of aiming for.
In Britain and Australia, and I don't know if we could speak to the United States, are young people getting into music at a higher rate than they used to? Is it gaining in popularity?
Yeah, I think it would be safe to say it's a global phenomenon that music education is losing ground. Less and less people are choosing to study it, especially at tertiary level. There's some very clear research out of the UK showing that A-level, the final year of school exam numbers are going down year on year. In Australia, there's a new piece of research coming out that's looking at this, and everything's pointing to the fact that it's pretty much the same trend. It's all heading down. I can go into the reasons why people are suggesting that might be if you want, but that's the short answer. Yeah, it's heading downwards.
I can't believe that.
I
can't believe that music is going down.
I think Greg and I were shocked for a minute. Because I know for Greg and I, we're always talking about music. He's an advanced musician compared to me. I'm a more or less of a beginning musician, but we love music. And is that something that's kind of more popular with older people than maybe younger people, do you think?
Possibly, but I think it's about how music is being taught and how music is perceived in culture and in community. There's a few things I could go into here, but I think at a base level, if I sort of look at it in a macro level, what most people that are studying this are suggesting is that the way that culture and society is heading, there's less and less value for the arts generally and for music because of its contribution to the economy. So music I mean, people can cite that the music industry, especially in the UK, there's always this number thrown out. I can't remember what it is, but something like $6 billion goes toward, comes from the music industry into the national economy. Regardless of that, culturally and socially, people don't see music as a valid career path, right? And that's been around for a long time, but more and more so because of the way that economies, politics, culture all work together to suggest that music's not valid. It really doesn't contribute to the economy, and there's no clear trajectory for a job. It's not like a student that does maybe one of the STEM subjects, let's say, that you can say if you do mathematics, there's XYZ thousands of jobs that you could potentially do by getting a great score in mathematics. If you say to a student, like, study music, they'll be like, well, why? What's it going to do for me? And so for a music teacher, this is another part of what we're trying to do with music teachers in the international schools. We're trying to tackle this, and we're trying to say, like, what is the value of music? Why do we have music at elective level, at IB and at A level in these international schools? What is it serving? What is it doing to our children? What do our parents, what do their parents believe about it? What does the school believe about it? Because it's a real conundrum, because the numbers are going down. I would argue that the passion for music is still there. Kids still love music. Everyone listens to music still. Like, there's no kind of dearth of music generally in society. It's just the value of it in terms of the trajectory and what society values today in terms of what education should do, which is essentially support the economy. It's not there, or it's very hard to justify for many people.
In this country that we happen to be in, this Middle Eastern country we're in, it used to be a couple of years ago, right before COVID, it was still almost just before COVID, it was illegal to have outdoor music concerts. And I was in a jazz band with Brian, who I mentioned to you before, and a couple other people that are absolutely great. I mean, you're talking about over 20 people that just got together and did fantastic with a downright jazz band, okay, big band jazz. We did Frank Sinatra, we did 40s jazz, we did some amazing, amazing tunes. We sold out a theater of 1,000 people. And then we went out into the desert. And we had, the first year we went out in the desert and played in the middle of the desert. And it was this bright idea of this man that was living across the street from me. And I wanted to share this with you because it has a couple great stories about music in my life. And this is the first international school I've worked at, unfortunately, where I've found an adult band to play with on Monday nights or whatever. We would get together and play, and then play concerts. We went to Bahrain and played concerts. We went to other places around the Middle East and played concerts. In our country, it was outlawed for a long time, and then it finally opened up, which is great. I had 7 instruments in my apartment. Now I'm down to 4. Kent, how many do you have?
I'm staring at about 4 right now. I've got a recorder, 2 recorders, 2 flutes, and some keyboards.
And there is my last question for you, Chris, before I open it up to you guys to end up, because we've been on for a while. Here's my question, Chris. Recorders in 4th grade, really? Every country I've been to, every international school I've been to, Kent, you teach 4th grade, right? What's with the recorder has stood the test of time, and international schools put them on the buying sheet for music teachers, I think, before they even arrive. What are your thoughts on recorder here, Chris?
I love this question. Okay, if you had asked me this 15 years ago, I would have been like, I hate the recorder. yeah. Never want to see it again. So I did recorder in 4th grade. As a student, and I just remember hating it. But I remember learning When the Saints Go Marching In and Hot Cross Buns and all the things that everyone learns. I just remember hating it. And then
same today, same songs we do now.
Right, we still do. Every country that I've been to, same thing. Go ahead.
Well, so I'm not like a staunch recorder advocate. Don't get me wrong, but the interesting thing about the recorder that I learned was that they're just so. If they're done well, and that's probably the caveat, there's certain things I think that some teachers don't do and just makes it an absolute nightmare for everyone else in the whole school. But if it's done well, the recorder can be such an incredible learning tool for that age. It's dexterity. They're using 2 hands. There's birth control stuff. There's pitch stuff because the recorder's not, perfectly pitched. So your students have to listen as they play. It's so accessible. It's small. You can pack it down. You can take it anywhere. It's cheap. Like, there's so many good things about it. And it leads to so much else. So you can take the recorder, and obviously the next obvious thing is flute and clarinet. Like, once you're in that hand position, and then you progress to any other instrument you can think of.
I knew you were going to say that.
So
I knew you were going to say it, and that's what I love.
I think also I just wanted to sort of jump on what you were saying, Greg, about your experience with music being outlawed. Just quickly, just tapping into that idea, because that's something quite unique to the international school context. And there's many countries where that's a real issue for music teachers. So I just wanted to kind of acknowledge that as a international school music teaching kind of person that is really interested in that field, because we do have a lot of teachers struggling with that concept. And that's another added thing. They've been told to go and build a program in a country where religiously, culturally, it's out, it's not accepted. So there's another barrier, which is quite tricky.
Well, the international teaching field is got so many wonderful, positive things about it, and yet there's a lot of hurdles. So I think that having you on our show and introducing you to our listeners and opening up the opportunity to start listening to your podcast, which is growing. You've got, 9 episodes now, but you're growing at lightning speed. You have a ton of people waiting to be on your show. You're easy to listen to, and it's a well put together show, I must say. We've been around for a year and a half now, and we're still putting things together. We do it on the side. It's just sort of fun. We added Kent along here, and Matt loves it too when he can. We love having the opportunity to talk to international teachers from around the world, and you are a very important piece as a music teacher. Kent?
We love music teachers. We love music, and we hope you'll come back and you'll update us on your project in the future. And before we wrap up, do you want to say anything in closing, Chris?
Yeah, well, thanks, guys. Thanks for what you're doing. I think the more discussions we have in this space of international teaching, the better. So thank you for what you're doing, and keep doing it. I think it's a really important space that you guys are filling with this podcast too. I guess if anyone's a music teacher listening, please reach out, get in touch, jump on Facebook, music teachers in international schools. Hopefully that's easy enough to remember, and, reach out to the community. There are definitely other networks out there, but we'd love to get in touch with you. And yeah, if anyone's got any questions about what it means to be a music educator in an international school, if you're thinking about taking the jump, you might be listening to this and you're not an international school teacher yet, but you're thinking about it and you want to know more about how music is represented in that world, more than happy to talk about it. Find me online, jump on my website, send me an email, whatever you want, and happy to talk.
Our guest today has been Chris Colma from Music Teachers in International Schools. This is Kent saying on behalf of Greg and myself, we'll see you next time when the baton drops.
We don't have a script, just so you know.